Hello, this is a brief video of this Chappell upright piano made in 1921, and it's come in part exchange, so as you can see, very dusty, and we're trying to decide whether to just give this piano away or what to do with it. It's on death row, so to speak, waiting its fate, but as it's a Chappell, 88 keys and ivory keys at that, I'm straight away thinking that it's the kind of piano that we might be able to recycle. The problem is it's not got the name of Bechstein on it, or a similar name to that, which would mean it's immediately we'll be able to make a profit out of it, hopefully. But being a Chappell, and this is a badge on here as opposed to being inlaid brass. But let's have a look at the piano, see if it's going to be possible to make a profit out of it, or on what to do with it. My casework's mahogany, quite plain but extremely dusty, and I've been hanging around doing nothing for a long time. The pitch of the piano is actually over 15 beats flat, at the A's over 15 beats flat, so not far off a semitone flat. This A here says say over 15 beats flat. This D is almost a semitone flat, so very flat. I suspect not being left around, not being used for a long time. So, but the tone here is quite strong. I think if it was pitch raised, it would sound quite reasonable. Now, looking at the inside, someone's changed the tapes here not incredibly long ago, and interesting enough, the hammers, there's plenty of felt left on them, as though they've not been used a lot. So this looks more interesting. Dampers are very dirty. Regulation is not incredibly bad on the dampers, although it's bad, but not as bad as it could be. They're coming off there about halfway to the string, although this one is coming off far too early. So we're still thinking about this. Then the hinges here, that's another thing to look at. Not loose. I'm immediately thinking the piano hasn't been very much used. There's quite a lot of slack here, so that's there's quite a variety there. The interesting system of repair here. There's one capstan used on top of another, or half of one. So obviously limited work things in the workshop there, but also see the ways the keys are numbered. It's important, even if you've got numbers on the keys, to renumber them usually, because you'll find the numbers, although they might be embossed, when you try and put them back on, you're thinking, is that a 7 or is that a 4? I'm not quite sure. The embossing's not so good, so play safe and put numbers on. We'd perhaps be a bit more discreet and put, see, you've got the numbers here actually, I didn't notice that, so that's very wise to put the numbers on, even though they seem to be embossed well. You'd be surprised how hard they can be to read sometimes, so that's sensible to renumber them anyway. We'd probably do them in pencil and a bit smaller. So lifting some keys up, you can see the felts have been replaced, so if we look at the felts under the keys, though, they haven't been replaced, and we find that there is quite a lot of sideways play. It can probably be taken up with the cricket bat here. You take up sideways play by turning that cricket bat shape, that's why it's called that. Just turn it, and we've got adjusters for that, and then you take up the slack. Probably that's the thing to do. You can obviously, ideally, in a top quality piano, replace the felts. So that's another thing to think about. Dampers regulation to the pedal, again, is quite good really. Let's listen to the break point. For a Chappell, that's not too bad, and the bass strings are sounding promising, slightly out of tune. I think what we've got to do next is to pitch raise. To do so, we would lubricate here, because what happens is if you turn them, and also take the strings down, if you turn them up without taking them down first, it's very easy to break them. If you lubricate there, if this been not tuned for a long time, a rust bond often appears here. So taking them down, and at the pressure bar again, lubricating above the pressure bar, again the rust bond can form there. We found that normally if you do that on a reasonable quality piano, you won't get any strings breaking, especially as there haven't been any broken in the past. So you can raise them straight up to say A450, and they'll drop back down to A444 hopefully, or maybe a bit lower, and then they can be fine-tuned at that pitch and then drop back further to A40 gradually. Looking at the regulation here again, see the dampers are not too badly regulated. They're coming off about halfway. There's a hammer there that's a bit tighter than the rest, but generally that's looking encouraging. I think what we've got to do really is pitch raise, as I say, and then make a decision after that. You might think, why are we bothering with a piano like this? In my past, early piano restoration and retail days, we used to do a lot of this kind of chapel. This would be in Portsmouth, would have been one of the sort of we would sell all sorts of pianos because there were no keyboards in those days, so this would have been nearer the sort of mid to top end of the range, so that would be something I'm very used to working on. As we got the piano away from the wall, you can look at the back. There's a resident spider still alive, by the way, in this piano, and you see the soundboard, well constructed and in good condition, so that's another promising thing. Looking down the bottom piano, no moth, and as you see, the felts have been replaced under the keys anyway. Very dusty. The pedal is well adjusted already. No sign of any woodworm either. So these are some of the things we're thinking about. So as I say, pitch raising is the next thing to do, and decide after that what to do with the piano, whether to spend more time working on it. As I say, if it was a Bechstein, then we would think differently, because the name Bechstein helps, and the general tone of the Bechstein is very rich and warm. The tone round here, where you're playing the piano mostly, mid-treble, is a bit thin, but not disastrously so. The action on this piano is what we call a Langer style action, as opposed to Swando. It's got the extra bit here. I don't know if I've explained this in another video. I haven't got any Schwander type to show you, I don't think, but this is the higher quality of Chappell action. And generally, the springs here, by the way, they're going to be fine, I'm sure. So let's think about the tone of the piano. That's the most important thing, really. And the touch, I think, difficult to decide. I always have a soft spot for these, because I know that these top quality Chappells were some of the best things available in the 1920s as regards English pianos. See, if the piano is like this Bechstein that we have in stock, this is an older piano, Bechstein Model 3, and it has a wonderful underlying tone, but needs a new rest plank. Actually, this one, although someone's replaced some of the pins here, they're still loose. So in this case, we're used to this on the older models of Bechsteins, having to replace the rest plank, but that's very expensive, but it is worth doing, because the underlying tone of the piano is very good. The touch is also very good. So, and the name Bechstein helps. So that one will definitely be worth doing, although very expensive to replace the rest plank. That's the wood behind here that the tuning pins are going into. We've done it quite often with the old models of Bechstein, and they have a wonderfully rich, warm tone. So that's a brief assessment of this Chappell upright piano that's come in part exchange and made in 1921. I have a soft spot for these Chappells, remembering reconditioning many of them in my early days of piano dealing. But it's difficult to make it cost effective nowadays, but it could turn into a very reasonable instrument, a very pleasant sounding one at the same time. So we're going to the next task will be to pitch raise the piano and to see what it's like after that, see if the tuning pins are tight or not. Our apprentice tuner is going to have the worrying task of doing that. I say worrying because it's always a worry that you might break strings, but no strings are broken so far, and we've lubricated the pressure points, which tends to mean you're not going to break any. I remember in my early days of piano tuning, a piano shop I worked for in the beginning, they gave me the task of pitch raising a piano which had already had broken strings on it. I didn't know about lubricating the pressure points in those days. Started pitch raising, and one of the very first strings broke. And I mentioned this to the owner, and he said, well, no, still need it at concert pitch. The person who's buying it wants it at concert pitch. So carried on, and about the 7th or 8th string broke there. In the end, I broke about 10 strings on the piano. I was very inexperienced as well, and by the end of the day I was feeling really shell-shocked, because each time one went bang, you were worried about the next one breaking, and I went home trembling to my wife and said, she said, "What's the matter?" "Well, I've been pitch raising a piano and so many strings are broken." And it really was a worrying task, I can assure you. And nowadays, hopefully we don't do that so often. In fact, very rarely do we break strings. If you do have, however big the pitch raise is, if you lubricate first, take them down carefully before you take them up. I don't think it's likely we'll break a string on this piano, but come back and see what happens. I think we will probably work on this piano and sell it as an inexpensive instrument, but it'll all depend on whether the tuning pins are tight and also the tone we end up with at the end of the day. Obviously trying to improve the case a bit as well. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that this has been a helpful video. So I'm happy to report that the work's gone well. In fact, the piano's been sold since I made the last video. So just making a very brief video to go through some of the things we did. One of our apprentice technicians was working on it, which enabled us to do a bit more work than we would otherwise have done. So we buffed the keys, for instance. There are a couple that are slightly shorter than the rest, but they've all been buffed. So they're looking as good as they can. The casework, as you can see, that's just been made good, and certainly looks much better. You had to renew some felt around the pedals as well, as they were making a noise. Now, the great news is the pitch raise went well. We didn't have any problems with raising it. It's now gone to 443. It's settled at 442.5. It'll drop slightly probably, but not below 440. And right throughout, no problems at all, except there was just the second or third last string that broke. And the same string was used, as is correct to do. It's much better than changing the string. Changing the string, it won't match in. We go down and back up again. I don't know if you can see, actually, as it's a top one, we can see that the strings go down and back up again. And so you wind some off here, and then wind it back down on the other one, and that sounds fine. That's quite weak at the top. There we are. And obviously, the sound's not very strong. The problem there is that it hits so close to the top of the string. That's why they don't sound very strong, but that's normal. And then generally, the piano now sounds very good. Just a little bit of damper regulation to do here and there, and I think everything else is finished. The piano's been fine-tuned as well, regulated. We were talking about the slack on here. That's all been taken up so that this part and this part move together. It's very important that this part doesn't move first, by the way, so you just have to double check that you haven't over-regulated it, because if that part moves first, you can find that the jack doesn't go back under. There's the jack, and that should go right back under as it does now. This is the jack here, and it's got to go right back under, and it does. But if this comes, basically, if it's over-regulated, then the jack might not fall under at all. By the way, these chalk marks are made for regulation purposes, so you can see which of the dampers need regulating. So there's a brief look at the piano now it's been finished, and we're very happy to say that the piano's turned out really well. Pitch raising was no problem, which was the first thing to see. Was it going to be able to pitch raise without strings breaking? When just one near the top, which was really not really a problem. The tone is very even for a very pleasant piano. Very pleasant piano. So if you have an old English piano, especially a top-range Chappell, it's something which is worth restoring, really. I've mentioned earlier on the thought process that went through there, but the end result has been very satisfying indeed, and there's something special about an English piano. I really enjoy the tone of it. It has a brightness and a clarity. And sings nicely in both the tenor and the treble. A bit of voicing still to do as well, some of the hammers, and really the work can go on and on, as all technicians know. It's difficult to know when to stop, but certainly I'm very satisfied with the overall sound of this piano.